Steve Irwin. On September 4, 2006, 44-year-old Steve Irwin was filming an underwater documentary segment at Bat Reef off the coast of Australia. The wildlife conservationist, known worldwide as the crocodile hunter, had spent decades working with dangerous animals including crocodiles, venomous snakes, and sharks. That morning, Irwin and his crew were capturing footage for a documentary series called Ocean's Deadliest. Weather conditions had forced them to postpone other filming, so they decided to shoot some filler material in shallow water with stingrays. Stingrays are generally docile creatures that avoid confrontation with humans. Fatal stingray attacks are exceptionally rare, with only a handful documented in history. Around 11 a.m., Irwin was swimming in chest-deep water above a stingray. He approached the animal to film it from above. The stingray, possibly mistaking Irwin for a predator or feeling threatened by the shadow above it, suddenly whipped its tail upward. The barbed tail struck Irwin multiple times in rapid succession. One strike pierced his chest, and the jagged barb penetrated directly into his heart, causing a 2-inch wound. The injury caused massive internal trauma and cardiac arrest. Irwin's crew immediately pulled him onto their boat and began CPR while rushing to shore. Despite frantic efforts to revive him, Steve Irwin was pronounced dead shortly after. The entire incident was captured on film, making it the only known fatal stingray attack ever recorded on video. However, the footage has never been publicly released and was destroyed at the request of Irwin's family. The shocking death made headlines worldwide. Millions of fans who had watched Irwin fearlessly handle deadly crocodiles and venomous snakes were stunned that he died from an animal considered relatively harmless. In the aftermath, Irwin's family continued his conservation work through the Australia Zoo and Wildlife Warriors organization. Bruce Lee. On July 20, 1973, 32-year-old Bruce Lee was in Hong Kong, working on his upcoming film Game of Death. The martial arts superstar and international icon appeared to be in perfect health and peak physical condition. That afternoon, Lee attended a meeting at the apartment of actress Betty Ting Pei to discuss the film. Around 7 p.m., Lee complained of a headache. Ting Pei gave him a tablet of Equagesic, a prescription painkiller containing aspirin and a tranquilizer. Lee took the medication and lay down to rest in a bedroom. Hours passed. When others tried to wake Lee for a dinner meeting, he would not respond. Ting Pei and producer Raymond Chow attempted to rouse him without success. They called Lee's personal physician, who arrived and spent 10 minutes trying to revive him. An ambulance rushed Lee to Queen Elizabeth Hospital, but doctors were unable to revive him. Bruce Lee was pronounced dead at age 32. An autopsy revealed that Lee's brain had swollen significantly, weighing about 13% more than normal. The official cause of death was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. Pathologists determined that Lee had suffered a severe allergic reaction to one of the components in the Equagesic painkiller. His brain's hypersensitive reaction caused fatal swelling. The coroner's verdict was death by misadventure, meaning accidental death. The shocking death of someone so young and fit sparked immediate conspiracy theories. Over decades, people have speculated about everything from assassination by organized crime to a family curse, especially after Lee's son Brandon also died young in a freak accident. Some theories suggested heat stroke or dehydration. In 2022, researchers even proposed that Lee might have died from hyponatremia, essentially drinking too much water, which can also cause brain swelling. However, the official medical conclusion remains that Bruce Lee died from an allergic reaction to medication. Lee's death remains one of the most discussed and analyzed celebrity deaths, a medical mystery that continues generating theories decades later. Isidora Duncan. On September 14, 1927, 50-year-old Isidora Duncan was riding in an open-air sports car through Nice, France. The American-born dancer had revolutionized modern dance and was known for her flowing, dramatic style both on stage and in daily life. Duncan was a passenger in an Amilcar automobile driven by a young French-Italian mechanic named Benoit Falchetto. She was wearing one of her signature accessories, an extremely long hand-painted silk scarf that hung loosely around her neck and trailed down her back. As the car accelerated down the street around 9 p.m., Duncan's scarf began flowing in the wind. The long fabric caught in the car's open-spoke rear wheel and became entangled in the rear axle. The scarf wound tightly around the rotating axle in an instant. Because the scarf was wrapped around Duncan's neck, the sudden tension yanked her violently out of the moving vehicle. The force was tremendous. Duncan was pulled backward out of the car and onto the cobblestone street. The scarf tightened around her neck like a noose, strangling her. Her neck broke from the violent force, killing her almost instantly. She was dragged several feet along the street before the driver realized what had happened and stopped the car. Witnesses described the horrific scene of Duncan lying on the cobblestones, the scarf still wrapped tightly around her neck and tangled in the car's axle. She died before medical help could arrive. The bizarre accident shocked the world and became immediate international news. Writer Gertrude Stein remarked that affectations can be dangerous, referring to Duncan's habit of wearing such dramatic flowing scarves. The manner of death was so unusual that medical professionals later coined the term Isidora Duncan syndrome to describe accidental strangulation by clothing or accessories caught in machinery. Media coverage at the time described the death as an extraordinary manner for such a celebrated artist to die. Duncan's tragic end became one of history's most famous freak accidents, a cautionary tale about how fashion choices and moving machinery can combine with fatal results. Anton Yelchin. On June 19, 2016, 27-year-old Anton Yelchin returned to his Los Angeles home in the early morning hours after a rehearsal with friends. The rising star, known for playing Pavel Chekhov in the rebooted Star Trek films, lived in a house on a steep driveway in Studio City. Yelchin drove a 2015 Jeep Grand Cherokee, equipped with a controversial electronic gear shifter. Around 1:10 a.m., Yelchin parked his SUV on the sloped driveway and exited the vehicle. What he apparently didn't realize was that the gear shifter's confusing design had left the vehicle in neutral rather than park. The Jeep began rolling backward down the incline. Yelchin was positioned between his vehicle and a brick mailbox pillar with a security fence when the SUV started moving. The Jeep pinned him against the brick pillar and metal security gate. The crushing force trapped his body between the vehicle and the solid structure. He was unable to escape or call for help. Friends found him several hours later, still pinned between his Jeep and the gate. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Anton Yelchin was pronounced dead at the scene from traumatic asphyxia caused by the crushing compression. He had likely lived for several minutes while trapped, unable to breathe properly due to the pressure on his chest. The tragedy became even more disturbing when investigators revealed that Yelchin's vehicle was part of a massive recall. Fiat Chrysler had recalled over 1 million vehicles, including his model, because the electronic gear shifter design confused drivers. The shifter's design made it difficult to determine what gear the vehicle was actually in, leading to numerous rollaway incidents. Yelchin had received recall notices but hadn't yet brought his vehicle in for the repair. His parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Fiat Chrysler, arguing that the defective design killed their son. In 2018, the family reached a confidential settlement with the automaker. Yelchin's shocking death robbed Hollywood of a promising talent and became a cautionary tale that prompted automotive companies to reconsider electronic shifter designs. David Carradine. On June 4, 2009, 72-year-old David Carradine was staying at the Swiss Hotel Nilert Park in Bangkok, Thailand, while filming a movie. The actor, famous for the 1970s television series Kung Fu and Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill films, had checked into the hotel alone. On the morning of June 4th, a hotel maid entered Carradine's room for housekeeping. She discovered his body in the closet. Carradine was found hanging with a rope around his neck and genitals. He was unclothed. Thai police were called immediately and began investigating. Initial reports suggested possible self-harm, but evidence quickly pointed toward a different conclusion. The scene indicated accidental death during a solitary intimate act gone wrong. Thai authorities determined that Carradine had died from asphyxiation, but not intentionally. A second autopsy conducted in the United States confirmed the findings: death by asphyxiation with no evidence of self-harm. The conclusion was that Carradine had accidentally strangled himself during a dangerous practice. The circumstances of Carradine's death ignited a massive media frenzy. Tabloid newspapers published graphic leaked photographs from the death scene, causing tremendous anguish to his family. Some family members initially refused to accept the findings and theorized about possible foul play, suggesting he might have been attacked. However, authorities in both Thailand and the United States consistently ruled the death accidental. Carradine's death certificate officially listed the cause as asphyxiation due to accident. The incident remains one of Hollywood's most startling celebrity deaths, demonstrating how a public figure's final moments can be shockingly at odds with their carefully cultivated image. Vic Morrow. On July 23, 1982, 53-year-old actor Vic Morrow was filming a night scene for Twilight Zone the movie at Indian Dunes in California. The scene depicted a Vietnam War scenario, with Morrow's character rescuing 2 children from a village under attack. The production had hired 2 child actors, 7-year-old Micah Ding Lei and 6-year-old Renee Shinyi Chen. The scene called for Morrow to carry the children through water while a helicopter hovered overhead and explosions detonated around them. Filming began around 2:20 a.m. The helicopter was flying at low altitude, only about 25 feet above the actors. Pyrotechnic charges were detonating to simulate artillery explosions. During one take, a series of explosions went off near the helicopter. The blast debris and shockwave caused the helicopter to lose control. The aircraft began spinning and descended rapidly. Within seconds, the helicopter crashed directly onto the 3 actors in the shallow water below. The main rotor blades were still spinning at full speed. Vic Morrow and one of the children were struck by the rotor blades and killed instantly. The other child was crushed beneath the helicopter. All 3 died at the scene. The horrifying accident was captured on multiple cameras. The footage showed the helicopter's catastrophic descent and the moment it struck the actors. Investigations revealed serious safety violations. The production had illegally hired the children to work at night, violated child labor laws, and ignored safety protocols regarding helicopter operations and pyrotechnics. Director John Landis and 4 crew members were charged with involuntary manslaughter, marking the first time a Hollywood director faced criminal trial for a film-related death. The trial lasted 10 months. In 1987, all defendants were acquitted of criminal charges, though the families of the victims reached civil settlements. The case fundamentally changed Hollywood's approach to on-set safety, leading to stricter regulations for stunts, pyrotechnics, and child actors. Owen Hart. On May 23, 1999, 34-year-old professional wrestler Owen Hart was performing at a World Wrestling Federation pay-per-view event called Over the Edge at Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri. Hart was scheduled to make a dramatic entrance as his character the Blue Blazer, descending from the arena's rafters on a cable and harness system. The stunt called for Hart to be lowered approximately 78 feet from the ceiling, down to the wrestling ring, while thousands of fans watched. Around 8 p.m., Hart was secured in a safety harness and lifted into the rafters above the arena. The harness was attached to a cable controlled by a winch system. However, the setup used a quick-release mechanism that could be accidentally triggered. As Hart was being positioned above the ring, something went wrong. The quick-release clip disengaged prematurely, likely triggered accidentally by Hart's own movements. Hart plummeted over 70 feet. Falling from the rafters directly toward the ring, he struck the top rope of the wrestling ring chest first, before landing in the ring. The impact caused massive blunt force trauma to his chest. Emergency medical technicians rushed to the ring immediately. The arena fell into shocked silence as medical personnel worked on Hart in front of the live audience. He was quickly transported to Truman Medical Center, but Owen Hart was pronounced dead shortly after arrival from internal injuries. The fall had been partially captured on the event's video feed, though the live television broadcast had cut to a pre-taped video package moments before the accident. Wrestling commentators later solemnly announced Hart's death during the broadcast. An investigation revealed that the quick-release mechanism, designed for ease of use, had proven too easy to accidentally trigger. Hart's widow, Martha, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the WWF. The case was settled out of court for $18 million. The incident prompted wrestling promotions to implement much stricter safety protocols for aerial stunts and elaborate entrances. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones, and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments. Ralph Dale Earnhardt, Daytona International Speedway 2001. On February 18, 2001, 49-year-old Ralph Dale Earnhardt was competing in the 2001 Daytona 500 at Daytona International Speedway in Florida. A 7-time NASCAR Cup Series champion and one of the most recognizable figures in motorsports, Earnhardt was driving his black No. 3 Goodwrench Chevrolet in what marked his 25th season at the highest level of stock car racing. That afternoon, the weather was perfect: blue skies, warm temperatures, and a light breeze. The race had gone smoothly, typical of Daytona's restrictor plate style, where cars run inches apart at speeds exceeding 190 miles per hour. After leading 17 laps earlier, Earnhardt spent the final portion of the race guarding his 2 cars up front, teammate Michael Waltrip in first place, and his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. close behind in second. Positioned in third, Earnhardt played the role of protector, keeping the aggressive pack behind him at bay. As the white flag waved for the final lap, the intensity reached its peak. Sterling Marlin, running just behind, made a move to the inside, looking for a way around. Earnhardt instinctively shifted slightly down the track to block the pass. The 2 cars made the slightest contact, Marlin's front bumper brushing Earnhardt's left rear, sending the black No. 3 Chevrolet into a brief slide toward the apron, the flat area separating the track from the infield. Fans in the stands watched closely, confident that the seasoned driver would save it as he had done many times before. But in correcting the slide, Earnhardt's car suddenly snapped upward across the track and into the path of Ken Schrader's Pontiac. Schrader's right front clipped Earnhardt's passenger side, forcing the No. 3 car into the outside wall at roughly 160 miles per hour. The car struck hard, then slid down the banking into the infield. Track crews rushed to the scene within seconds. Schrader climbed from his car, peered into Earnhardt's window, and immediately waved for help. At 5:16 p.m. EST, doctors at Halifax Medical Center pronounced Dale Earnhardt dead from a basilar skull fracture. His passing stunned the sports world and prompted NASCAR to revolutionize safety, mandating head and neck restraints, installing shock-absorbing barriers, and redesigning cars to better protect drivers. Dale Earnhardt's final race changed the sport forever. Adam Petty, New Hampshire Motor Speedway, 2000. On May 12, 2000, 19-year-old Adam Petty was practicing at the New Hampshire International Speedway in Loudon, New Hampshire. He was part of the famous Petty racing family and had just started building his own NASCAR career. That day, he was practicing for the Busch 200 race, running laps and getting used to the track. Everything seemed normal at first, just another day at the racetrack. As practice progressed, Adam ran more timed laps and appeared confident behind the wheel. Then, during one of his runs shortly after 12 p.m. in the second practice session for qualifying, something went horribly wrong. Coming down the backstretch toward turn 3, his throttle jammed wide open, meaning the car kept accelerating even as he tried to slow down. He braked and shifted down, but nothing worked. He couldn't slow the car, and there was nowhere to go. The critical moment came in an instant. His car shot straight into the outside wall at turn 3 at full speed, hitting almost head-on. The impact was massive, causing a fatal head and neck injury. Track safety crews arrived within seconds and began working to remove him from the wrecked car. They reportedly cut through the roof, working furiously for 20 minutes before freeing Adam and rushing him to the hospital. He was taken to Concord Hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. The loss of Adam Petty shook NASCAR to its core. He was so young, incredibly talented, and carried one of the sport's most legendary names. His tragic death forced NASCAR to take a serious look at its safety standards. The organization soon introduced a kill switch on steering wheels, so drivers could shut off their engines if a throttle ever got stuck again. Over time, more safety improvements were added, including better head and neck restraints and stronger barriers around the tracks. Kenny Irwin Jr., New Hampshire Motor Speedway, 2000. On July 7, 2000, 30-year-old Kenny Irwin Jr. arrived at New Hampshire International Speedway in Loudon, New Hampshire, the same track where Adam Petty had died just 2 months prior. He was there to practice for the Winston Cup race scheduled for that weekend. Kenny had made a name for himself as one of NASCAR's bright young talents, having won Rookie of the Year in 1998 and was known for his smooth driving and competitive spirit. During that Friday practice session, Kenny took his car out for several laps, working on speed and handling. Everything looked normal as he built up momentum on the track. Then, during one of his runs down the backstretch heading into turn 3, something suddenly went wrong. The car didn't respond as it should have. Reports later suggested that the throttle might have stuck open, which meant the car kept accelerating even as he tried to slow down. Kenny tried to regain control, but at that speed, there was little he could do. In the critical moment, the car went straight toward the outside wall between turns 3 and 4 and hit it nearly head-on. The impact was violent, sending the car spinning and flipping onto its roof. The force of the crash caused a basilar skull fracture, the same kind of injury that had killed Adam Petty at the very same track just 2 months earlier. Track safety crews rushed to the scene right away. They reached the car within seconds and began working to free Kenny from the wreckage. He was taken to Concord Hospital as fast as possible, but the crash had been too severe, and he was pronounced dead not long after. The loss of Kenny Irwin Jr. shook the NASCAR community deeply. He was talented, respected, and still had so much ahead of him, but the aftermath came with much better safety standards that improved the process throughout the coming years. Tony Roper, Texas Motor Speedway, 2000. On October 14, 2000, 35-year-old Tony Roper was racing at Texas Motor Speedway in Fort Worth, Texas. He was competing in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, driving his number 26 Ford in the O'Reilly 400. Tony came from a racing family and had worked his way up through smaller series to reach NASCAR's national level. For him, this was another chance to prove himself against some of the best in the sport. The race had started normally the night before, on October 13th. Tony had qualified 15th and was holding his own in the early laps. As the race went on, he ran close to the middle of the pack, moving alongside other drivers to gain position. Then, just past lap 30, everything changed. While racing down the front stretch, Tony tried to make a move between trucks driven by Steve Grissom and Rick Ware. The right front of Grissom's truck made slight contact with Tony's left rear, which instantly sent Tony's truck veering hard to the right. In that split second, the truck went straight into the concrete wall at full speed. The impact was nearly head-on, and the force of the crash was tremendous. The truck burst into flames and came to rest near the wall. The violent impact caused a severe neck injury that immediately left Tony unresponsive inside the truck. Safety crews reached the scene within moments. They quickly cut the roof off the damaged vehicle and worked to pull Tony out. He was rushed first to the Infield Care Center and then airlifted to Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. Doctors found that the impact had caused a neck injury that cut off blood flow to his brain, leaving him in a coma. Despite all efforts to save him, Tony Roper passed away the next morning at 10:55 a.m. Tony became the first driver ever to die during competition at Texas Motor Speedway and the third NASCAR driver lost in 2000, following Adam Petty and Kenny Irwin Jr. earlier that year. Fireball Roberts, Charlotte Motor Speedway, 1964. It was May 24, 1964, and Glenn Fireball Roberts was at Charlotte Motor Speedway in Concord, North Carolina. He was one of NASCAR's biggest stars at the time, famous for his speed, confidence, and the fiery style that earned him his nickname. Fireball was already a winner of major races like the 1962 Daytona 500, and that day, he was hoping to add another big victory to his career at the World 600. The race had barely begun when trouble struck. Fireball had qualified in 11th place, which put him right in the thick of the action as the field bunched together in the early laps. On lap 7, 2 cars ahead of him, driven by Ned Jarrett and Junior Johnson, tangled and crashed. Fireball tried to swerve and avoid them, but there wasn't enough room. His car hit the inside retaining wall hard, and in that instant everything went wrong. The impact ruptured his fuel tank, and the car burst into flames. Within seconds, his vehicle was engulfed, turning into an inferno as it slid down the track. Fireball was trapped inside, pinned under the dashboard, and other drivers could hear him shouting for help. Jarrett stopped his own car and ran toward the wreckage, trying desperately to pull him out, but the flames were too intense. Track safety crews reached the burning car quickly and managed to pull Fireball out, but he had already suffered severe burns. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, with second- and third-degree burns covering most of his body. Doctors did everything they could, and for a time, it seemed like he might survive. But after several weeks of fighting, complications set in, and on July 2, 1964, Fireball Roberts passed away. His death hit the racing world hard. Fireball wasn't just a talented driver. He was a fan favorite and one of the sport's most recognizable names. In the months that followed, NASCAR made big safety changes. They introduced fire-retardant driver suits, redesigned fuel cells to prevent ruptures, and pushed for better emergency response equipment. J.D. McDuffie, Watkins Glen International, 1991. On August 11, 1991, J.D. McDuffie was racing at Watkins Glen International in Watkins Glen, New York. He was a veteran of the NASCAR Winston Cup Series, known for his determination and love for the sport. J.D. had been racing for almost 30 years, often fielding his own car on a small budget. Around lap 5, J.D. was running mid-pack when something went terribly wrong. His car suffered a mechanical failure. The left front wheel spindle broke off, which meant he instantly lost steering and control. The car veered to the right and clipped another driver, Jimmy Means, before shooting off the track toward the barrier. McDuffie's car slammed into the tire wall and guardrail at nearly 170 miles per hour. The impact was so violent that the car lifted off the ground, flipped, and came to rest upside down. The crash caused fatal head and neck injuries, leaving him unresponsive inside the wreckage. Track safety crews reached the scene within moments. The race was immediately stopped, and red flags waved across the track. Medical personnel worked quickly, but it was too late. J.D. McDuffie was pronounced dead at the scene. The loss of J.D. McDuffie marked the end of an era. He was one of NASCAR's toughest and most respected independent drivers, someone who raced purely for the love of it. His death exposed safety issues at Watkins Glen. The section where he crashed was too fast and didn't have enough protective barriers. Because of this, track officials made immediate changes. For the 1992 season, they added a new bus stop chicane, a sequence of 2 mirror-image corners designed to slow down traffic by forcing a sharp S-shaped path called the inner loop to slow cars before that dangerous section. Joe Weatherly, Riverside International Raceway, 1964. On January 19, 1964, Joe Weatherly was racing at Riverside International Raceway in Riverside, California. He was a 2-time Grand National champion and known for his fun-loving personality that earned him the nickname the Clown Prince of Racing. The race that day was the 5th event of the 1964 season, and Joe was running strong in his number 8 Mercury. The track at Riverside was a challenging road course, filled with tight corners and long straightaways. During the race, Joe's car reportedly had some mechanical issues, possibly related to the brakes or oil system, but he pushed through them and kept racing as hard as ever. As Joe entered Turn 6, one of the track's tricky sections, his car drifted wide toward the outside wall. The left side of the car slammed into the steel barrier. At the time, cars didn't have window nets or many of the safety features that exist today, and Joe wasn't wearing a shoulder harness because many drivers feared getting trapped in case of a fire. The force of the crash threw his head outside the window, and it struck the wall on impact. Safety crews rushed to the scene within seconds, but the crash was devastating. When they reached his car, there was nothing they could do. Joe Weatherly was pronounced dead at the track. The loss of Joe Weatherly hit NASCAR hard. He was 41 years old, still at the peak of his career, and one of the sport's most respected and entertaining figures. In the months that followed, NASCAR officials began rethinking driver safety. They soon made shoulder harnesses mandatory and introduced window nets to keep drivers' arms and heads inside the car during crashes. They also improved the padding and structure of car doors to better protect drivers from side impacts. Clifford Allison, Michigan International Speedway, 1992. On August 13, 1992, 27-year-old Clifford Allison took part in a practice session for the Detroit Gasket 200 at Michigan International Speedway in Brooklyn, Michigan. He was the son of NASCAR legend Bobby Allison and a proud member of the famous Alabama gang. Clifford had big dreams of following in his father's footsteps and was competing in the NASCAR Busch Series, hoping to build a name of his own in racing. Everything seemed routine at first as he ran several laps, getting his car dialed in and finding his rhythm on the fast 2-mile track. Michigan was a high-speed oval, and every turn demanded precision and control. Coming through turn 4, Clifford's car suddenly lost control. It began to spin and then slammed hard into the concrete outside wall on the driver's side. The hit was severe, nearly a straight-on impact, and the force tore the seat loose from its mounts. When that happened, his safety harness could no longer hold him in place, leaving him exposed to the full force of the crash. Track safety crews reached the wreck almost immediately. They pulled Clifford from the car and began emergency treatment right there on the infield. An ambulance rushed him toward the nearest hospital, but his injuries were too severe. Clifford Allison passed away while being transported, just a few minutes after the crash. Clifford's death hit especially hard because of who he was, not just a promising young driver, but the son of one of NASCAR's most beloved champions. In the aftermath, Clifford's death raised serious concerns about safety equipment inside race cars. NASCAR began looking closely at seat mounts, harness designs, and the way driver protection systems were installed. If you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments. Liam Payne. On October 16, 2024, 31-year-old Liam Payne checked into the Casa Sur Palermo Hotel in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The former One Direction member had been in Argentina attending a concert by his former bandmate Niall Horan. That afternoon, hotel staff became increasingly concerned about Payne's behavior in his third-floor room. Around 5 p.m., the hotel manager placed an urgent call to emergency services. In the recorded 911 call, the manager frantically reported that a guest was overwhelmed by drugs and alcohol and was destroying the room. The manager specifically expressed fear because the room had a balcony. Just minutes after that call, at approximately 5:07 p.m., a loud crash was heard in the hotel's interior courtyard. Liam Payne had fallen from his third-floor balcony. He landed in the courtyard below. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but Payne was pronounced dead at the scene from multiple traumatic injuries sustained in the fall. When police entered Payne's hotel room, they found a chaotic scene. The television had been smashed. Aluminum foil, white powder, and drug paraphernalia were scattered around the room. A half-drunk glass of champagne sat on a table. The room showed clear signs of a struggle or violent episode. Investigators determined that Payne had been alone in the room when he fell. Toxicology reports would later reveal the presence of multiple substances in his system. The exact circumstances of how he went over the balcony remained under investigation. The death shocked the music world. One Direction had been one of the biggest pop groups of the 2010s, and Payne had millions of fans worldwide. Payne's former bandmates issued statements expressing their devastation. The hotel balcony fall became one of the most discussed celebrity deaths in recent years, raising questions about hotel safety protocols and the dangers faced by celebrities struggling with substance abuse. Michael Jackson. On June 25, 2009, 50-year-old Michael Jackson was at his rented mansion in Los Angeles, preparing for his This Is It comeback concert tour. Jackson had been struggling with insomnia for years and had employed a personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, to help him sleep. Around 12 p.m., Jackson was in his bedroom, receiving his daily treatment. Murray was administering propofol, a powerful anesthetic used in surgical procedures, through an intravenous drip. Jackson called it his milk because of its milky white appearance. This wasn't a sleeping pill. Propofol is what anesthesiologists use to render patients unconscious for surgery. Murray had been giving Jackson nightly propofol infusions for weeks so he could sleep. That day, after administering the propofol and other sedatives, Murray left Jackson alone in the bedroom to make phone calls. When he returned, Jackson wasn't breathing. Murray began CPR and called for help, but precious minutes had been lost. Paramedics arrived and transported Jackson to UCLA Medical Center. Doctors worked for over an hour trying to revive him. Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. from cardiac arrest caused by acute propofol intoxication. The news broke online and literally crashed the internet. Twitter, Wikipedia, and AOL Instant Messenger all experienced outages as millions tried to access information simultaneously. Dr. Conrad Murray was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter for administering the propofol in a home setting without proper monitoring equipment. Jackson's death revealed the extreme lengths he had gone to in pursuit of sleep, essentially undergoing surgery every night in his bedroom. Lisa Left Eye Lopes. On April 25, 2002, 30-year-old Lisa Lopez was driving a Mitsubishi Montero SUV on a highway in La Ceiba, Honduras. Lopez, known as Left Eye from the Grammy-winning group TLC, was in Honduras working on a spiritual documentary and recording music. She had brought cameras to document her journey of self-discovery and healing. Several passengers were in the vehicle with her, and a camera was rolling from the passenger seat, capturing their road trip. As Lopez drove along the highway, another vehicle appeared ahead in her lane. Lopez swerved to avoid a collision. The sudden maneuver caused her SUV to lose control. The Montero rolled multiple times across the roadway. The camera continued recording as the vehicle tumbled, capturing chaotic images of the interior spinning before the screen went black. Lisa Lopez died instantly from severe neck and head injuries sustained in the crash. Her passengers survived with various injuries. When the footage was recovered, it showed Lopez at the wheel just seconds before the fatal crash. The existence of video documentation of her final moments made the tragedy particularly haunting. But there was another layer to the story. Weeks before her own death, Lopez had been a passenger in a van that struck and killed a 10-year-old boy in Honduras. She had been deeply affected by the accident, paying for the boy's funeral and speaking to his family. In conversations recorded before her death, Lopez had expressed a belief that a spirit or curse was following her. She felt the boy's death was a warning or sign. Then, on a highway just weeks later, she died in a vehicle accident herself. TLC had been working on a comeback, and Lopez's death meant the group could never fully reunite. Her surviving bandmates were devastated. The crash footage has never been publicly released out of respect for her family, but its existence has fueled ongoing fascination with her final days in Honduras. Aaliyah. On August 25, 2001, 22-year-old Aaliyah finished filming a music video in the Bahamas. The R&B star and actress had spent several days shooting the video for her single Rock the Boat on the island of Abaco. The shoot had wrapped, and her team was preparing to return to Florida. A small twin-engine Cessna 402B had been chartered to fly Aaliyah and her crew back to the United States. However, the team had accumulated significant equipment and luggage during the video shoot. Everyone wanted to leave that day rather than wait for a larger aircraft. Around 6:45 p.m., Aaliyah and 8 others boarded the small plane at Marsh Harbor Airport. The pilot was 30-year-old Luis Morales III. The Cessna began its takeoff roll down the runway. The plane lifted off but immediately struggled to gain altitude. Within seconds, the aircraft crashed just 200 feet from the end of the runway, slamming into the ground and bursting into flames. All 9 people aboard died. Aaliyah was killed on impact. Investigations into the crash revealed a cascade of negligence. The aircraft had been loaded with approximately 700 pounds more weight than its maximum capacity. The team's insistence on taking all their equipment had doomed the flight before it began. Additionally, toxicology tests showed the pilot had cocaine and alcohol in his system at the time of the crash. Records revealed that Luis Morales was not properly certified to fly the Cessna 402B. He had lied about his qualifications. The plane itself had questionable maintenance records. Every factor that could go wrong had gone wrong. Aaliyah's death at 22 robbed the music world of one of its brightest rising stars. She had just completed filming the Matrix sequels and was at the peak of her career. Had anyone insisted on waiting for proper equipment, a certified pilot, or a larger aircraft, Aaliyah would have lived. Instead, impatience and negligence killed everyone aboard. Randy Rhoads. On March 19, 1982, 25-year-old Randy Rhoads was on tour with Ozzy Osbourne, traveling through Florida on the band's tour bus. Rhoads was one of rock's most talented young guitarists, having revitalized Osbourne's solo career with his virtuoso playing. The tour bus stopped overnight at a property in Leesburg, Florida, owned by the bus driver's family. That morning, the bus driver, Andrew Aycock, decided to take a small Beechcraft Bonanza airplane that was parked on the property for joyrides. Aycock had a pilot's license. Though it had expired, he had also been using cocaine. Around 8 a.m., Aycock began taking crew members up for short flights. Randy Rhoads, despite a fear of flying, agreed to go up in the plane. The band's tour manager also boarded for the flight. Ozzy Osbourne was asleep on the tour bus below. As Aycock flew the small plane, he decided to play a dangerous prank. He would buzz the tour bus to wake up Osbourne and the sleeping band members. Aycock made a low pass over the bus. Then he circled and came back for another pass, flying even lower. On the second or third pass, Aycock misjudged his altitude. The plane's left wing clipped the tour bus. The impact sent the aircraft into an uncontrolled spin. The Beechcraft cartwheeled through the air and crashed directly into a nearby mansion, exploding on impact. All 3 people aboard died instantly in the fireball. On the tour bus, Osbourne woke to the sound and impact of the wing striking the vehicle. He initially thought the bus had crashed. When he got outside, he saw the burning mansion and wreckage. Someone told him Randy was on the plane. Osbourne had lost his best friend and musical collaborator in a pointless prank. The tour was immediately canceled. Rhoads was buried in California, and the rock world mourned a generational talent cut down at 25 by someone else's reckless stupidity. Sophie. On January 30th, 2021, it was just a normal day for 34-year-old Sophie in her third-floor apartment in Athens, Greece. The Scottish musician and producer had become one of the most influential figures in experimental pop music, pioneering the hyperpop genre and producing for artists like Madonna and Charlie XCX. Around 4 a.m., Sophie climbed to the roof of her apartment building. She had brought a camera, intending to photograph the full moon that hung bright over Athens. The moon was particularly luminous that night, and Sophie wanted to capture its beauty. As she moved around the rooftop trying to get the perfect angle for her photograph, Sophie slipped. She fell from the roof, dropping 3 stories to the ground below. Emergency services were called, and she was rushed to a hospital. Doctors worked to treat her injuries, but Sophie died from the trauma of the fall. News of her death spread quickly through the music community. There had been no drugs, no car crash, no violence. Sophie had simply been trying to photograph something beautiful and lost her footing in the dark. Sophie had been intensely private, and details of her personal life were scarce. Her death at 34 seemed impossibly young. Tributes poured in from across the music industry. Artists who had worked with her described her genius and kindness. The hyperpop movement she had helped create continued to grow, but without its pioneering architect. Sophie's death highlighted the fragility of life and how quickly everything can end, even for someone reaching for beauty rather than engaging in risky behavior. Ritchie Valens. On February 3, 1959, 17-year-old Ritchie Valens was on tour as part of the Winter Dance Party, traveling through the frozen Midwest. Valens had been famous for less than 8 months, but his songs La Bamba and Donna had already made him a star. The tour had been grueling, with long drives on freezing buses through Iowa in the middle of winter. After a show at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, headliner Buddy Holly decided to charter a small plane to the next tour stop to avoid another miserable bus ride. Holly booked seats for himself and his band members, but Valens desperately wanted a seat on that plane. He approached guitarist Tommy Allsup, who had one of the seats, and begged him for it. Allsup was reluctant. They decided to flip a coin. Valens called heads. The coin came up heads. Valens reportedly said, "That's the first time I've ever won anything in my life." He took the seat on the plane. Shortly after 1 a.m. on February 3rd, the small Beechcraft Bonanza took off from Mason City Airport in a light snowstorm. Aboard were pilot Roger Peterson, Buddy Holly, J.P. Richardson, and Ritchie Valens. Within minutes of takeoff, something went wrong. The plane veered and crashed into a frozen Iowa cornfield. All 4 died instantly on impact. Investigators later determined the pilot had become disoriented in the storm and lost control. The tragedy became known as "The Day the Music Died," immortalized in Don McLean's song American Pie. 3 of rock and roll's brightest young stars had died together. For Ritchie Valens, the coin flip that seemed like good luck had actually sealed his fate. Tommy Allsup, who lost the coin toss and stayed on the bus, lived another 58 years. Elvis Presley. On August 16, 1977, 42-year-old Elvis Presley was at his Graceland mansion in Memphis, Tennessee. The king of rock and roll had been struggling with health problems and prescription drug addiction for years. His weight had ballooned, and he could barely perform. That afternoon, Elvis went into his bathroom. Hours later, around 2:30 p.m., his girlfriend Ginger Alden found him unresponsive on the bathroom floor, face down on the carpet. She called for help immediately. Elvis's road manager and others rushed in and attempted to revive him. An ambulance transported Elvis to Baptist Memorial Hospital, but he was pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. The initial announcement stated he had died of a heart attack. What emerged later was far more complex and undignified. The autopsy revealed that Elvis's colon was massively enlarged, approximately twice the size of a normal human colon. He had suffered from severe chronic constipation caused by years of opioid abuse. The strain of attempting to use the bathroom, a physical effort known as the Valsalva maneuver, had likely triggered cardiac arrhythmia and heart failure. Elvis Presley, the most glamorous and successful entertainer in the world, had essentially died straining on the toilet from drug-induced constipation. The toxicology report showed significant levels of multiple prescription drugs in his system, including codeine, Valium, and other medications. His personal physician, Dr. George Nikopoulos, had prescribed thousands of pills to Elvis in the months before his death. The world mourned Elvis as a cultural icon, but the medical reality of his death revealed a man who had been slowly killing himself with prescription medications. Tens of thousands of fans descended on Graceland. Elvis was buried there after a funeral attended by celebrities and dignitaries. The bathroom death became tabloid fodder, but it also highlighted the deadly consequences of prescription drug abuse. Whitney Houston. On February 11, 2012, 48-year-old Whitney Houston was staying at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles. That evening, the hotel was hosting a pre-Grammy Awards party thrown by music executive Clive Davis, Houston's longtime mentor. Around 3:30 p.m., Houston drew a bath in her 4th-floor suite. She filled the tub with extremely hot water, over 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Houston had cocaine and prescription medications in her system. She lowered herself into the scalding bathwater. At some point, Houston lost consciousness. She slipped beneath the water and drowned. When her assistant found her around 3:35 p.m., Houston was face down in the tub. The assistant called for help. Paramedics arrived and attempted resuscitation, but Whitney Houston was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined she had died from accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors. The water had been so hot it had burned the skin on her back, but Houston had been too intoxicated to feel the pain or pull herself out. The circumstances were grim, but what happened next shocked many. Houston's body was removed from the hotel room and taken to the coroner's office. That same evening, just hours after her death, Clive Davis's pre-Grammy party proceeded as scheduled in the ballroom downstairs. Davis made a brief statement about Houston's death. Then the party continued with performances and celebration. Whitney Houston's body had been in the building hours earlier, and now guests were drinking champagne in the same hotel. The decision to continue the party drew criticism, though Davis defended it as what Whitney would have wanted. The bathtub death of one of music's greatest voices became another cautionary tale about addiction's deadly grip. Prince. On April 21, 2016, staff at Paisley Park, Prince's estate and recording complex in Minnesota, found the 57-year-old musician unresponsive in an elevator. Emergency services were called at 9:43 a.m. Paramedics arrived and attempted resuscitation, but Prince was pronounced dead at the scene at 10:07 a.m. The news shocked the world. Prince had just performed shows days earlier and seemed to be in his usual form. The investigation revealed a tragic case of accidental poisoning. Prince had been suffering from severe chronic hip pain, the result of decades of performing in high heels and executing athletic stage moves. He had been taking what he believed were Vicodin pills for the pain. Toxicology results showed Prince had exceedingly high levels of fentanyl in his system. The pills he had been taking were not legitimate Vicodin. They were counterfeit pills manufactured illegally and pressed with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin. Prince had unknowingly been taking fentanyl, believing it was prescription hydrocodone. On April 21st, he took pills that contained a lethal dose. Investigators found similar counterfeit pills throughout Paisley Park, in vitamin bottles and other containers. Prince had likely been obtaining them through intermediaries without knowing they were fake. Prince became a victim of the fentanyl crisis that was beginning to sweep America. He left no will, and his estate became tied up in legal battles. His death highlighted the deadly danger of counterfeit prescription pills, a problem that has only worsened in subsequent years. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones, and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments. Miyamoto Musashi. On June 13, 1645, 61-year-old Miyamoto Musashi sat kneeling in a cave called Reigondo near Kumamoto. Musashi had spent decades as Japan's most feared swordsman, fighting 61 duels to the death and never losing a single one. He developed a revolutionary two-sword fighting technique and written treatises on strategy that influenced military thinking for centuries. By 1645, Musashi had retired from dueling. He'd spent his final years as a hermit, living in the cave and dedicating himself to philosophy, painting and writing. His body had begun failing. He developed thoracic cancer that caused pain and difficulty breathing. Musashi knew his death was approaching. Rather than seeking medical treatment or comfort, he chose to spend his remaining time in solitude and contemplation. He sat at a small wooden desk in the cave, writing by candlelight. In his final weeks, Musashi composed the Dokudo, meaning the way of walking alone. This brief text contained 21 precepts for living an independent, disciplined life. The rules reflected his lifetime of martial experience distilled into philosophical wisdom. On June 13th, Miyamoto Musashi died while kneeling at his desk in Reigondo Cave. The man who'd killed dozens of opponents in single combat died peacefully from natural causes, a writing brush in his hand rather than a sword. Musashi's death was extraordinary precisely because it was ordinary. The deadliest swordsman in Japanese history never fell in battle. He died undefeated, his perfect record intact. His writings, particularly the Book of Five Rings and the Dokudo, became foundational texts in Japanese martial philosophy. Saigo Takamori. On September 24, 1877, 49-year-old Saigo Takamori stood on Shiroyama Hill near Kagoshima, surrounded by government forces. Saigo had been one of the architects of the Meiji Restoration, helping overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate and restore imperial rule. However, he'd grown disillusioned with the new government's modernization policies and treatment of the samurai class. Saigo had led the Satsuma Rebellion, the last major samurai uprising against the imperial government. For months, his forces fought against the modern conscript army, equipped with rifles and artillery. By September 1877, Saigo's rebel army had been reduced to a few hundred men trapped on Shiroyama, The Battle of Shiroyama began before dawn on September 24th. Government forces numbering over 30,000 attacked from all sides. Saigo's remaining samurai fought with traditional swords and spears against overwhelming firepower. The battle was hopeless. During the fighting, a bullet struck Saigo in the hip. He fell, unable to stand. As government forces closed in, Saigo knew capture was imminent. According to samurai tradition, he decided to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, to preserve his honor. However, his injury prevented him from performing the ritual properly. Saigo couldn't maintain the kneeling position required for seppuku. His loyal lieutenant, Beppu Shinsuke, had to support him physically, while Saigo attempted to cut his abdomen. Unable to complete the ritual himself, Saigo gave the signal. Beppu performed kaishaku, the act of beheading to end suffering during seppuku. Saigo Takamori died on Shiroyama Hill. The Battle of Shiroyama marked the end of the samurai era. Saigo became known as the Last Samurai, though his story bore little resemblance to the Hollywood film. He died fighting for a world that was disappearing, killed by the modernization he'd helped create. Oda Nobunaga. On June 21, 1582, 47-year-old Oda Nobunaga was staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto. Nobunaga had spent decades unifying Japan through brutal military campaigns and political maneuvering. He controlled approximately half of Japan's provinces and was on the verge of complete dominance. His ruthless tactics had made him both feared and hated. That morning, Nobunaga was at the temple, with only a small retinue of guards. Most of his army was away on distant campaigns. One of his trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, was supposed to be marching west to join another campaign. Instead, Mitsuhide turned his army toward Koito. Around dawn, Akechi Mitsuhide's 13,000 troops surrounded Honnoji Temple. Nobunaga woke to the sounds of gunfire and his guards fighting. He initially thought it was a minor disturbance, but quickly realized the temple was under full assault. Nobunaga grabbed a bow and fought from inside the temple, shooting at attackers. However, the situation was hopeless. He was vastly outnumbered, and Mitsuhide's forces were setting fire to the temple buildings. As flames engulfed Honnoji, Nobunaga retreated into the interior of the burning temple. Knowing death was certain, he chose to commit seppuku rather than be captured or killed by his enemies. He performed the ritual suicide as the temple burned around him. Oda Nobunaga died inside the flaming temple. However, his body was never found. The intense fire reduced everything to ash, and no remains could be definitively identified as Nobunaga's. The absence of a body sparked centuries of speculation. Some theorists claimed Nobunaga escaped and lived in hiding. However, he almost certainly died in the temple, his body simply consumed entirely by the flames. The disappearance of Japan's most powerful warlord's remains added mystery to his already legendary status. Sanada Yukimura. On June 3, 1615, 48-year-old Sanada Yukimura fought in the summer siege of Osaka, the final battle that would establish Tokugawa dominance over Japan. Yukimura had allied with the Toyotomi clan against Tokugawa Ieyasu's forces. He was renowned as the Crimson Demon for his red armor and fearless combat. That day, Yukimura led a desperate assault directly at Tokugawa Ieyasu's command post. His forces broke through multiple defensive lines, coming closer to killing the future shogun than anyone else in the battle. Tokugawa's forces were thrown into chaos. However, Yukimura's men were outnumbered and eventually forced to retreat. The fighting had been intense. Yukimura himself had been in constant combat for hours. By the time his forces fell back, he was physically exhausted. Yukimura made his way to a small shrine called Yasui Shrine. He removed his distinctive red helmet and sat down against a tree to rest. His body could no longer continue fighting. Enemy soldiers soon spotted him sitting there. According to historical accounts, when the soldiers approached, Yukimura recognized that escape was impossible. He reportedly said, "I am Sanada Yukimura. Take my head." He made no attempt to defend himself or flee. The soldiers killed Yukimura where he sat. His head was taken as proof of his death. Sanada Yukimura, who'd fought so fiercely just hours before, died too exhausted to resist. His final words acknowledged both his identity and his acceptance of death. Yukimura became a legendary figure in Japanese culture, celebrated for his bravery and loyalty, despite fighting on the losing side of history. Uesugi Kenshin. On April 19, 1578, 48-year-old Uesugi Kenshin collapsed in his castle's lavatory. Kenshin, known as the Dragon of Echigo, had been one of the most powerful warlords of the Sengoku period. He'd fought numerous campaigns and was famous for his rivalry with Takeda Shingen. On the morning of April 19th, Kenshin had been experiencing stomach pain. He went to the lavatory and collapsed there. Servants found him unconscious. He never regained consciousness and died 4 days later on April 23rd. The official cause of death was likely a stroke or similar medical emergency. However, the circumstances of his death in the lavatory sparked legends. One persistent story claimed an assassin had hidden in the cesspit beneath Kenshin's toilet for days, then speared him from below at his most vulnerable moment. While the assassination story is almost certainly false, it became part of Kenshin's legend. The idea that such a powerful warlord could be killed by an enemy hiding in human waste appealed to storytellers. The truth, that he died from natural causes while using the toilet, was both more mundane and more human. Kenshin's death left his domain without a clear successor, leading to internal conflict. The man who'd survived countless battles died suddenly from illness. Akechi Mitsuhide. On July 2nd, 1582, 54-year-old Akechi Mitsuhide was fleeing through the countryside near Kyoto. Just 11 days earlier, Mitsuhide had committed one of the most shocking betrayals in Japanese history. He'd attacked his lord Oda Nobunaga at Honnoji Temple, forcing Nobunaga's death. Mitsuhide had briefly seized power, but his reign lasted only 13 days. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of Nobunaga's other generals, rushed back from a distant campaign and defeated Mitsuhide's forces at the Battle of Yamazaki. After the battle, Mitsuhide fled with a small group of retainers. They traveled through the countryside, trying to reach safety. Mitsuhide wore expensive golden armor that marked him as a high-ranking warrior. As Mitsuhide's group passed through a village called Ogarusu, they encountered local farmers. One farmer, seeing the golden armor, realized this was someone valuable. The farmers attacked with bamboo spears, hoping to claim the armor and any reward. In the chaotic struggle, a bamboo spear struck Mitsuhide. The wound was serious enough that he couldn't continue fleeing. Realizing capture was imminent, Mitsuhide committed seppuku to avoid being taken alive. His head was then taken by the farmers. The man who'd killed Oda Nobunaga, one of Japan's most powerful warlords, died at the hands of peasants with improvised weapons. The golden armor that should have protected him had instead marked him as a target. Akechi Mitsuhide's death was as ignominious as his brief rule. Ishida Mitsunari. On November 6, 1600, 40-year-old Ishida Mitsunari was executed in Kyoto. Mitsunari had been one of the leaders of the Western Coalition at the Battle of Sekigahara, the decisive battle that gave Tokugawa Ieyasu control of Japan. The Western Coalition had lost, and Mitsunari was captured. As a high-ranking prisoner, Mitsunari was paraded through Kyoto before his execution. Large crowds gathered to see the defeated general. He was sentenced to death by beheading. On the day of his execution, Mitsunari was brought to the execution ground. As was customary, he was offered a final drink of water. However, the guard didn't have water immediately available, and instead offered Mitsunari a dried persimmon. Mitsunari refused the persimmon. When asked why, he explained that persimmons were bad for digestion. The guard and witnesses were stunned by this response. Mitsunari was about to be beheaded, yet he was still concerned about his digestive health. The incident became famous as an example of Mitsunari's character. Even facing imminent death, he maintained concern for his body's well-being. Some interpreted this as absurd, others as an example of extreme discipline and presence of mind. Moments later, Ishida Mitsunari was beheaded. His head was displayed publicly as a warning to anyone who might oppose the Tokugawa. The man who'd carefully refused a persimmon for health reasons died seconds later. Hijikata Toshizo. On June 20th, 1869, 34-year-old Hijikata Toshizo fought in the Battle of Hakodate on the northern island of Hokkaido. Hijikata was the vice commander of the Shinsengumi, a special police force that had fought for the Tokugawa shogunate during Japan's civil war. After the shogunate's fall, Hijikata and other loyalists had retreated to Hokkaido to continue resistance. The Battle of Hakodate was one of the last major engagements of the Boshin War. Imperial forces, equipped with modern weapons and ships, vastly outnumbered Hijikata's forces. The battle was essentially the final stand of those who opposed Japan's modernization. During the fighting, Hijikata led a cavalry charge against imperial positions. He rode at the front, wielding both traditional weapons and a modern rifle. As his forces advanced, imperial troops opened fire with rifles. A bullet struck Hijikata in the lower back as he charged on horseback. The wound was serious. He fell from his horse. His men tried to help him, but Hijikata Toshizo died from the gunshot wound on the battlefield. His death marked a symbolic moment. Hijikata had been one of the last samurai warriors actively fighting against modernization. His death by rifle fire, rather than sword, exemplified the transition Japan was undergoing. The age of the samurai was ending, replaced by modern warfare. Hijikata's body was buried in Hakuda. He became a legendary figure, representing the samurai spirit, fighting against inevitable change. His death effectively marked the end of the samurai era in Japan. Takeda Shingen. On May 13, 1573, 51-year-old Takeda Shingen died during a military campaign. Shingen had been one of the most powerful warlords in Japan, controlling substantial territory and commanding a formidable army. His rivalry with Uesugi Kenshin had produced some of the era's most famous battles. In 1573, Shingen was leading his army toward Kyoto, intending to overthrow the shogunate. However, he fell ill during the campaign. The exact cause is disputed. Some accounts claim he died from illness, possibly pneumonia. Others suggest he was shot by a sniper during a siege and died from infection. Regardless of the cause, Shingen realized he was dying. He gave final instructions to his generals. Most importantly, he ordered them to keep his death secret for 3 years. He wanted to prevent enemies from attacking while his clan transitioned to new leadership. Takeda Shingen died in his camp. His generals followed his orders. They concealed his death from everyone outside the innermost circle of retainers. Some accounts claim they used a body double, called a kagemusha, to impersonate Shingen at public appearances. For 3 years, the Takeda clan maintained the deception. Enemies who feared Shingen's military genius held back from attacking, believing he still lived. Messages and orders were issued in Shingen's name. The secret was maintained until the clan felt strong enough to reveal the truth. When the truth finally emerged, it shocked Japan. The man who'd been thought to command armies had been dead for years. Takeda Shingen's posthumous deception was perhaps his most successful strategy, buying his clan 3 crucial years. Minamoto no Yorimasa. On June 20th, 1180, 74-year-old Minamoto no Yorimasa faced defeat at the Battle of Uji. Yorimasa had been a respected warrior and poet of the late Heian period. He'd raised arms against the Taira clan, but was defeated at the Uji River. Realizing the battle was lost and capture was imminent, Yorimasa decided to commit suicide rather than face dishonor. What he did next became historically significant. Yorimasa retreated to the Byodoin temple near the battlefield. He took out a fan and composed a death poem, writing it on the fan's surface. The poem reflected on his life and impending death. After finishing the poem, he performed seppuku, cutting his abdomen with his sword. This is considered one of the first clearly documented instances of ritual seppuku. While samurai had committed suicide before, Yorimasa's death established many elements that would become standard in the ritual: the death poem, the formal setting, and the specific method. Minamoto no Yorimasa died at age 74, remarkable for the era. His death helped codify seppuku as the honorable death for defeated samurai. The practice would continue for nearly 700 years, becoming central to samurai culture. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones, and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.